Michael, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I just have to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, when you want to give a speech, there is a sort of process within the Foreign Office where officials will go away, they'll prepare a speech, and it comes back to you, and so there's various iterations. I think officials have now worked out that the easiest way of doing a speech for me is to first ask me what I want to say. But in preparation for this speech, I phoned Michael, and it was sort of in the evening, I think, and I sort of caught him, and I said, Michael, can we just have a chat? And he said, well, I'm actually in Sydney, and I'm just looking out over a beautiful sunrise, and I'm by the beach. And I understood what he meant, because literally a week earlier I had been in Australia looking at the same beach. But Michael very kindly gave me some thoughts on what I might say today. Hopefully a little bit of it is reflected in here. But I really want to thank Asia House for all the work that you do, and Michael particularly for your leadership. I think this work really means a lot to us, and I know I've had some interactions with you in the past, and I hope that's a relationship that will continue to strengthen. But I am really very delighted to be here to speak to an incredibly knowledgeable business audience. Indeed, some of you we have had dealings with in the past, so it's wonderful to be here. And of course, a very distinguished panel of individuals also from the diplomatic world. Now, many commentators have called this century, the 21st century, the Asian century. And actually, I completely agree with that statement. And for historians, the reality is that the economic center of gravity is merely returning eastwards. Those of you who are historians will know that in the 1700s, Asia's share of global GDP was nearly 60%, 60. It's currently just under 30% and rising. And you will find a whole bunch of predictions out there which suggest that by 2050, it'll be 50%. And some people think that this may actually come even earlier in 2030. But the reality is that whatever stats you look at, I think the one thing is clear is that the 21st century will absolutely belong to Asia, and Asia is going to be the most economically dynamic region in the world. And I do think this is just the world economic order reverting to norm. And that's why the government want to continue to strengthen our engagement in Asia, and we want to reinvigorate existing relationships, and we want to reach out to new partners who have not always received the attention they deserved. And this is actually our opportunity. Now, you will have noticed that we had a sort of small vote on the 23rd of June. But this was actually the biggest democratic exercise that has been undertaken in a generation in the UK, and the result was the result. And some of you will know that I campaigned pretty hard on the Remain side. We didn't win. The British people decided otherwise. And we have to just go on and implement the British people's wishes. But I just want to tell you a sort of a story, which is that on the evening of the 23rd, I was asked to go off and do some media for the Remain campaign. So I arrived at Festival Hall where the party was getting ready for the potential win. And I arrived about 12:30 in the morning on the 24th. And even by that stage, I think it was pretty clear that things were looking a little bit difficult for the Remain campaign. And by 3 o'clock, I think, it was effectively game over. And I remember, I was really pretty shocked. I think everyone there was shocked. I remember walking across Westminster Bridge at about 3:30 in the morning, and I took a photograph, which is still on my iPhone. I walked across and I went back to 9 Downing Street because I had an office there working for a most fantastic man called Oliver Letwin, who many of you will know, who was head of the Cabinet Office. And I waited for Oliver to come in. And about 4:30 in the morning, Oliver came in. We looked at one another, and then he said with great British understatement, "That didn't go according to plan." And it didn't go according to plan. And of course, a few hours later, David Cameron was no longer our Prime Minister. And it was a really emotional moment, I think, for many of us. If I talked to colleagues in the Foreign Office as well, a really, really emotional moment. And on that day, I drove back that afternoon to my constituency, and I remember sort of getting calls from investors who basically said, and I can put this politely, what have you done? But actually, if you sort of fast forward to where we are now, some months later, I mean, the reality is that the sky hasn't fallen in on the economy. In fact, the UK economy is continuing to grow, and actually more strongly than some would have predicted. We've had growth rates upgraded, and the business environment continues to be highly regarded. The World Bank ranks us 7th globally in the world in terms of ease of doing business, in fact, one place above the US. The World Economic Forum also ranks us 7th in terms of global competitiveness. We have a respected system of contractual law, as well as the lowest corporation tax rate in the G20. I don't know what the Chancellor is going to say in an hour, but we'll see where that goes. And the reality is that I think this is just a demonstration of the fact that the UK is very much open for business. As Michael was saying, since my appointment in July, I have traveled extensively in Asia, and I do think, sitting at home if you're the Foreign Office Minister is probably not the thing to be doing. You need to be getting out there and getting the message out. So I've been to China, to Japan, to India a couple of times, Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand. There's more travel to come before Christmas. But my immediate priority has always been to reassure the key contacts, the investors and the governments, about the immediate implications of a result that, quite frankly, no one expected. And in my meetings that I've had, the first question always comes up about Brexit. And you have to remember, this is Asia Pacific. I'm not traveling in Europe, where probably the first, second, and third question may be about Brexit, but this is Asia Pacific. The first question is always about Brexit, and very polite discussion on that. But the second question, which is, with huge energy, people ask, when can we do a free trade deal with Britain? And actually, what it demonstrates to me is that the UK is really incredibly highly regarded as a partner within the Asia-Pacific region. People want to do business with us, and they recognize that we may be leaving the EU, but we are not leaving leaving Europe, and we are absolutely a global force. We lead in just about every fora there is in the world when it comes to the UN Security Council, or the G20, or the G7, or the Commonwealth, or NATO. We are a global and outward-looking country, and that is something that our friends and partners in Asia-Pacific recognize. And this is the same message that I hear from my colleagues across government. So the Chancellor's visited China, the Secretary of State for Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy has been to Japan. Ministerial colleagues from the Department for International Trade and the departments are also traveling extensively in the region. And you will have noted that our Prime Minister, Theresa May's first bilateral visit outside Europe was to India. And I think that speaks volumes about her own personal commitment to enhancing Britain's relationships across Asia. So you are going to be seeing a lot more travel to Asia by members of the government, a lot more trade missions. I certainly plan to be taking companies out with me in 2017 when I go to Asia. A lot more engagement from just about every part of government, and that's part of our plan. And so this is about having those conversations about the future and the opportunities that they present. And as I said, people are really very positive in Asia Pacific. On a practical level, we're also looking forward to the opportunity to engage in different ways with Asia once we're outside the EU. For example, through the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and, of course, very importantly, ASEAN. And we have already established trade working groups, including with Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan, and India. And broadly, the aim of these groups is to discuss on a bilateral basis how we can improve trade now and start also to scope out what a trading relationship may look like post-Brexit. Now, I just want to make it absolutely clear to you that whilst we are members of the European Union, we will continue to support free trade agreement discussions that the EU is having with countries like Japan, which will be starting with Australia and New Zealand. That is absolutely the case, and I mean that with all sincerity. But of course, we do need to look to the future, but we will only start formally those free trade negotiations with third-party countries after we have concluded our relationship with the European Union. And of course, I talked about the fact that investors from Asia-Pacific see Britain as a land of opportunity, somewhere to invest, and they've put their money where their mouth is. You have seen SoftBank acquiring Arm for £24 billion. It's the biggest investment ever by an Asian player into the UK. And what this also included, very importantly, is a commitment to double the number of employees. And it just shows that Britain has not lost its allure to international investors. Indeed, when I was in Australia and New Zealand, people were incredibly positive, really incredibly positive, some of whom were already big investors in the UK. You'll have seen the Chinese developer ABP is going to invest £320 million in phase 1 of the 1.7 billion London Royal Albert Docks project. Of course, there's also the Nissan announcement and commitment to build the next generation of Qashqai and X-Trail in the UK, upgrading their factory to a super plant. And there's a whole list that I could deliver for you. Now, there used to be a perception that, quite frankly, trade issues were beneath the Foreign Office, and that they were somehow sort of apart from the day-to-day work of Britain's international diplomacy. Since my arrival, however, I have seen the relentless focus of our ambassadors and high commissioners on securing business for British companies and helping to foster commercial links between the UK and partner countries. And I would just say that diplomatic life now for UK diplomats is much less about consuming Ferrero Rocher chocolates, and it's a lot more about promoting high-tech widget manufacturers in the Midlands. And that really is the case. I know I sort of make a bit of a joke about it, but that really is the case, and it's palpable, and you feel it when you go to missions. We are talking trade in a very, very effective way. As the Minister for Asia, I'm part, of course, of the wider government effort working hard to intensify and enhance UK-Asia trade relationships. I work closely with the Prime Minister's trade envoys, and I just want to pay tribute to Richard Graham, who many of you will know, Lord Faulkner you will know, and Lord Putnam, for all the hard work that they do across the region. You could argue the more people we have going out there from government representing Britain, the better, and that's what we're trying to do. And all of these individuals, not only are they great assets for the government and for British business, but they're also friends. We work closely, of course, with Chambers of Commerce. We support the work of the UK-India Business Council, the China-British Business Council, and the UK-ASEAN Business Council. And again, we don't just talk about supporting them, we actually also fund some of the work they do. So we do provide annual grants which help fund part of these organizations' work. All three are membership organizations who offer tailored support to large corporations and SMEs that are looking to expand their trade with Asia Pacific and the UK or attract investment from the region. And as I saw in person, the new offices of the British Consulate in Guangzhou is co-located with both the China-British Business Council and the British Chamber of Commerce, and this is a model that we're adopting in more and more cities in Asia. The Department of International Trade, of course, was created to ensure a whole-of-government effort to promote British trade across the world and ensure the UK takes advantage of the huge opportunities open to us. But this is, ladies and gentlemen, a one-government effort. We've got the Department of Trade, we've got the Foreign Office, but just about every department, and you will see ministers from every department going out promoting Britain and British business. Now, I hope you're going to bear with me, because no ministerial speech is complete without a whole list of statistics. Officials love this, and we have very many brilliant people working in the civil service, and I don't want to sort of shock any of you, but I'm sure some officials would have an absolute wet dream if a ministerial speech consisted entirely of statistics. Michael told me this is being recorded. Well, that's the way it goes. But look, here goes in some of the stats. And actually, the data is pretty positive. So, hang on to your hats. Total UK exports to China have grown 57% in the last 6 years. China has risen from our 10th largest export market in 2010 to our 4th largest in 2015. In the same year, total exports to the 6 largest ASEAN economies, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines, and Vietnam, equated to our 11th biggest export markets. We are seeing that it is working for investment too. This country is home to more Chinese investment than any other European country, with a total stock of 9.8 billion and an investment flow of 1.2 billion in 2014, including actually Huawei, which is headquartered in my own constituency. And China is expected to be the UK's second largest foreign investor by 2020. Investment from ASEAN is also growing, and the region now ranks as our 6th largest foreign investor. The cumulative stock of FDI from Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand in the UK is over 3 times that in the US and Germany combined. And more than 1,000 Japanese and over 800 Indian companies base themselves here in the UK, employing 250,000 people in a wide range of sectors. India is our 3rd largest foreign investor, with more Indian companies investing in the UK than in the rest of Europe combined. I hope you got all that. The speech will be shared. But look, I mean, the reality is that the core message for me is that actually bilateral trade and investment is improving. From a UK government perspective, we are doing absolutely everything we can. We're straining every sinew to make sure that we improve on this, and we know that we can do better, and we will. Now, I know your program for today's event talks of a new trade era. And last Monday, Theresa May set out her vision for that new era. Now, I recognize that there is something of a debate at the moment about the merits of free trade and indeed globalization. So let me be clear about the government's view. The Prime Minister recognized the overwhelmingly positive impact of liberalism and globalization, that these twin forces have lifted millions out of poverty, broken down barriers between nations and people, and strengthened the rules-based international system on which we all depend for our security and prosperity. And of course, we must acknowledge that there have been downsides. You'll have seen this from the financial crash in 2008 onwards, particularly coming through. And it is the case that the tide of globalization has carried many with it, but it has also left very many trailing in its wake. And I believe it was their voices that could be heard in the result in the EU referendum and indeed the US presidential election. And as our Prime Minister has said, we must listen to their voices. But our response should not be to reject global trade or to retreat into protectionism. So the UK will carry on being a vocal champion for free trade, and the UK will continue to champion the benefits of globalization. But we must also recognize that some things have to change. We must preserve what works and adapt what does not. And we believe once outside the EU, the UK has a great opportunity to lead the world into this new era, to be the strongest advocate for free markets and free trade, to support successful businesses, which at the same time, whilst at the same time encouraging them to support a successful society, as the Prime Minister would say, that works for everyone. And as Theresa May has said, our approach is not going to be about propping up failing industries or picking winners. We will leave that to free market competition. What it will be about is creating the conditions through our new industrial strategy for business to thrive and, most importantly, to benefit all. So I want to reassure you that the UK will not be stepping back from the world, as some may fear. Quite the reverse. Outside the EU, the UK will be free, flexible, and agile, and we will play a global role in foreign policy, international security and development, as well as trade. And we will be an independent nation working alongside the traditional trading blocs and trading freely with others in our best interests and theirs. So let me end with the words of the Prime Minister. She said, "Change is in the air, and when people demand change, it is the job of politicians to respond." But of course, it's not just politicians. Business leaders like you also have a key role to play in understanding the need for change. After all, adapting to customer demand is a fundamental principle of commerce. And as we all know, having to adapt and change brings risks, but I believe it also brings huge opportunities. And as the UK leaves the European Union, and as the world enters a new era for trade, the British government wants to work with business to champion global free trade, to remain outward-looking, and to harness all of these opportunities. Asia, all of Asia, with its dynamic economies and vast potential, will be at the heart of our approach. That is my personal commitment to you. Thank you.